Now let's look at some code examples of building an array and then actually using that array, and just kind of give you an idea of what it looks and feels like to actually build one of these things and code it. The way to get started with this, if you want to follow along with me, let's create a new project. Just make sure we're a Windows Forms Visual C# Windows project, and let's call this VTC Array, and just hit OK, take all the defaults, and we'll jump in here, and this is going to give us our basic Windows app with a blank form here. Let's open the toolbox, double click on button, and that'll drop a button onto that form. Then we'll just drag that button to the middle of the form because I have some sort of phobia about that. And so double click on the button, and let's just get right to creating our array. Now what we're going to do here is create the array. So we'll do that right here. And what we'll do here is we will say, tell it that it's going to be an integer array. The name will be ML. Then we'll set that equal to a new instance of the integer array, and it's going to hold 7 places or 7 pieces of data. And then with this one, we're just going to list the pieces of data that we're going to put in there, just like that. And just like that, we have created a new array. Again, notice the syntax. We've told it right here we're creating an array of integers. The name is ML. Then we're going to set that variable equal to a new instance of this integer with 7 characters or 7 pieces of data, and then we just list them inside our curly braces, and that will create the array. Now down here we're going to loop through the contents of the ML array. And so let's look at what we're going to do. First of all, we're going to put each one of these pieces of data out of this array into a message box. So we're going to have a string for that. So we're just going to create a string X and open it empty. Now we're going to use a for loop. And if you remember back a little earlier, we talked about a for loop, and there was back in a video actually entitled for loop. And if you remember, the strengths of a for loop was that we could control exactly how many times to loop through it. And there's some really cool things about arrays that we will look at. We'll look at some examples in some other videos. But for now, let's create a for loop, and we will say for, and then we're going to create an integer I, set it equal to 0. Then the next characteristic, we're going to say that as long as I, this is the Boolean expression, as long as I is less than, notice this, we're going to say ML, it sees our array, dot, and we're going to take the length property, and notice it's very easy to get to the length property, and this is just simply the number of contents or the number of items in our array. And then each time through this, we're just simply going to increment this I by 1. And so we will close this, and now we'll go in and we'll create our code. Now again, if you go back to the for loop, this is our counter, it's I, we're setting it equal to 0. And as long as I is less than the length of our array, that's a property of the array that's already there for us because we built our array and it's based off the array class, and that's one of the properties. And each time through the loop, we're going to increment by 1. So let's put this out here, and now we're going to say X, okay, plus equals. So we're going to load our string up with, we're going to have to do a convert here. We're going to convert to integer 32, and I'll double click on that to grab that so I don't fat finger it. And we're going to put the contents of ML I, every time it finds one, into this string, and then we're going to concatenate and put a space in there. And you'll see what's going on. There's a lot happening right there. And then we'll close our loop, and then we'll come down here, and once it's looped through that thing and it continues to concatenate a value and a space into X, then we'll just simply put a message box out there, and we will tell it to show us X. And then we're going to use, notice this overload here. We'll talk about overloads a little bit later on. We're going to put a string caption in there. And we're just going to say contents of array. And then we'll put our semicolon. Now when we click on the button, it should create the array, load it with these values, then loop through the array and put each one of the values into this string. It's going to grab each one as an integer, convert it to a string, and add it with the space between it, and then show it to us. And so we will run this and see if I fat-fingered anything. Apparently I didn't. We click the button, and there's our message box. And notice it reads the contents of the array. Now, the real power of these things comes in this process right here. This ability to loop through these arrays really quickly, store items, set items, read from items, count items. We can do an awful lot of stuff very quickly, very efficiently with an array. So that was creating it and then reading from it. And in the next video, I want to show you some of the things that we can just automatically get to and manipulate with an array, just because the arrays that we built are based off of that array class in the .NET framework.